Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this eagerly awaited event in the 2012 Small Wonder Short Story Festival. Before I welcome our speakers, I've got a couple of housekeeping announcements. If you could just take a moment to note the position of the numbered emergency exits. There's one on the right, on your left at the back, and then two more in the sort of social area you came in through. In case of an emergency, stampeding cattle, thermonuclear war, anything like that, please wait instructions from our stewards, who will be wearing very fetching neon jackets. And as we're in a dairy farm, we have a strict rule here that only the cows in the yard behind us are allowed to interrupt proceedings with noise. So can you ensure that your mobile phones are turned off? Thank you. I'm delighted to be welcoming our panel of speakers this evening, who I realise represent the very aristocracy of the comic world. We've got Rob David, Woodrow Phoenix, and Martin Steenson. And I'm just going to say a little bit about each of them by way of introduction. Rob Davis is a comic artist and writer who's been making comics since at least the age of 8. Having worn out his boots on the treadmill of British comics, from Roy of the Rovers to Judge Dredd, he burnt the boots and from their ashes rebuilt his career as an illustrator and short story writer. And his work is known to millions of children and their parents as an illustrator of the horrible histories and murderous maths books. But he's also worked for The Guardian and developed a Star Wars comic called Jedi Academy. Woodrow Phoenix, who's at the end, is a British comic artist, as well as a writer, graphic designer, and font designer. Typographical fonts, not the sort that you get at the back of churches, for which there's not much demand these days. He's also an author for children's books. He created the Sumo Family, Liberty Cat, and he's responsible for numerous critical and cultural studies of the comic. And he and Rob are the editors of Nelson, which is the book that we'll be discussing this evening. And chairing the event is Martin Steenson, who cleverly changed his name between the publication of our brochure and today in a possibly futile attempt to avoid the future by sidestepping the past. Martin is publicist with Blank Slate Books, for whom he's also a translation editor, or the translation editor. He owns and co-runs the website Avoid the Future, which reviews comics and illustrations and interviews their creators. So please join me now in welcoming Rob Davis, Woodrow Phoenix, and Martin Steenson. Thank you.
Well, hello, and thank you for joining us. As you just heard, I worked for Blank Slate during the time that this book was being produced. Rob and Woodrow are the editors, and it was a real kind of privilege to be part of the production at the time, because I think when you guys had the idea for the book originally, the British comic scene was kind of enjoying a bit of a renaissance, shall we say?
You can say that.
And yeah, and a lot of great new exciting work was being produced, and Rob and Woodrow had a great idea, and this anthology was born. So I guess the place that we should start is if I ask you to kind of just to give a brief history of how the project originated and how the initial kind of clarion call went out for the artists.
Well, I guess it starts with Rob. The comics community in Britain has taken to Twitter very, very, strongly. We all spend a lot of time on Twitter talking to each other because most of us work alone.
We spend a lot of time on our own.
Yeah, so it's a very good way for people to keep in touch. So Rob one day tweeted that he had a great idea for a book and didn't say anything else. Over to you.
Yeah, well, it's straight out of the back of what Martin's saying.
Can you hear us? Okay.
Yeah, is it clear? Yeah.
Okay.
I was really excited by seeing so many incredible storytellers in comics in Britain, and I wanted to find a vehicle that could bring them all together. But at the same time, I'm not a big fan of anthologies. I wanted to do something that could be a novel, and the idea came to me to do a novel that was a life, because all novels are a life to some sense, and I wanted to do a life and just take a year, starting with birth, and give 1 year to each artist, but just give them a day of that year. So they just create a short story, a little snapshot of somebody's life, and then we would build up the picture of a life. And I just, well, when you originally tweeted me and you said to me, what's this idea then? I explained it back to Woodrow, and it was so ridiculous and ambitious to try and get together, 50 artists and writers
40,
to tell. Well, it was 44 or something to begin with, yeah, and tell one story. It was a real herding cats idea, and Woodrow went for it, and then Martin's publisher Kenny also went for it. They both thought it was a really good idea, and so we started asking people if they were interested, and everybody. We ended up. Originally we were going to do it. I was starting the year that I was born in 1968, and have 43 as it was for that year, artists and writers, and we ended up having so many that we had to extend the book beyond 43. So.
Well, we had a list, didn't we? Because you had a list of people you wanted, and I had a list of people I thought would be good for it. Because one of the things about this book is that both Rob and I have been for a long time felt really kind of depressed and kind of squashed by the state of the comics industry. Because there's the industry and then the medium, and they're very different things. The industry is all about superhero comics and tie-ins and stuff that you get in Smith's that's always got a toy on the cover and is in some way related to some TV show or some film. Then there's the medium, which is just books about things.
It's just storytelling. It's a storytelling medium. I mean, that's all it is. You know.
And the two things aren't really the same thing at all. But we're always stuck because if you want to make money, you have to do things that are already commercially successful, which means you can't do anything original because nobody will publish it. So we're constantly fighting against this thing of trying to make something new, because we've kind of realised that actually new stuff tends to come from artists rather than from publishers, mostly. We're lucky that we've found one or two publishers now who are willing to take some risks, but they're small, so but that's okay. But anyway, so we had this idea to do a book that was going to do something different from all the stuff that was out there, because last year there was quite a lot of talk, in fact 2 years ago now, a lot of talk about how the new fantastic wave of comics was going to save everything, but it was all the same stuff. It was things like, Hit Girl and all kinds of superhero things,
Kick-Ass,
and Kick-Ass, and that one about secret agents who were retired, and just the same stuff in different jackets. So we wanted to do something that actually showed what people could do if they weren't doing genre things and if they weren't doing the same stuff all the time.
And what you've got is basically a collection of artists in this book who they're very diverse. In a way, you have all kinds of creators, and a lot of the creators in the book, like Woodrow says, have done commercial work before, but there are also a lot of new talents, a lot of talents working for art publishers. There's a lot of talents who have been known exclusively for children's comics. There's been a lot of talents who haven't even been published yet.
Yeah.
This book has got a lot of talent from all across the industry.
We were judging the people that we wanted in the book based on how good they were at being storytellers. We weren't really interested in how famous they were, or there are people in the book that are very successful, and they've worked in America and they've been published in by all the big publishers. But if we chose them, it was because they were a good enough storyteller to be able to carry our story, and we had restrictions on that story. It was going to be based in reality. We didn't want any fantasy. We didn't want any kind of spaceships and people flying with capes. We wanted to do a life story. It was a very simple scheme for everyone to follow, and it forced people who perhaps some of them their work is in fantasy, but it forced them to draw from their own life experiences and just write a short story, that fit that time capsule.
Because we're also thinking as well that when you have any kind of collaborative thing, you have to have rules, and they have to be pretty firm. Because both of us, actually, the year before we did Nelson, we had both been part of a collaborative comics thing where you would just do one page, the next person would do another page, and you'd go on like that. Right. Both of them kind of crashed and burned fairly kind of ignominiously, because if you don't have rules, there's always one person who thinks it's a great idea to kill the characters or put it in space or make everyone speak a different language or something. There's always someone who does that.
Well, we were thinking, the story has to be king. It's not about the artist's ego. It has to be the story as king. Which is what it should be anyway. If you're writing, it shouldn't be about pushing your own agenda. It should. If the story's that important, you want to tell it, then the story is king. And so the story had to be king for every single person that wrote here. So when we started, do you want to start flicking forward?
So what we're going to see now? We're going to yours or Paul's first?
Well, Paul's was actually an afterthought. So we start with mine. So what happened was I had to come up with a short piece that would set the tone. It's 1968. and so our lead character is just going to get born. It's the birthday of so the lead character, his or herself, isn't actually going to feature in it. So I did a short piece about the father missing the birth, and so you can see. So you can, that's better if you go back. So basically, it's just a typical kind of young bloke of the '60s who thinks that he's thinking about his kid and thinking about his family because he's obsessed with going and buying some gift that links into his own life. Because that's his kind of self-centered way of looking at the world. Meanwhile, there's a woman who's actually giving birth that he's kind of forgotten about because he's so obsessed with this gift that he's going to buy. So, but that was I wanted to set the tone for that yes, there could be stylistic ideas put in here, but it's going to be reality. And then Woodrow took it from. So you can see in the last panel there is Nelson. The father sees what he thinks is his son, and oh my goodness, there's Nelson. At that point, I passed it over to Woodrow, just like a game of consequences, and I noticed, and I think we both noticed in the conversation, that it's not actually clear that is a boy in that picture. And we thought, that might be quite interesting, because comics have been such a boys-only world. We thought maybe it'd be more interesting to get everyone to have to write about a woman, which would be a good twist to start with. And Woodrow then decided to twist it several
Even
more
further.
times.
Yeah. So what I did was, I decided that actually what he saw there was one of a pair of twins, so there's a boy and a girl. And not only that, but then one of the twins dies after a couple of months, so there's only one left, and that one that's left is Nell. So the idea of the book, if you see the cover of the book, which I haven't actually got a picture of on here, but there are some outside so you can see, it says Nell, son, and there's a little hyphen. It looks like it's just a design thing, but actually the whole point of this book is that Nell is one half of Nelson, and Sonny, her brother, is the other half. And a lot of the book is about her trying to find out, who she is without her missing twin. So it's quite a good device for making the story work. I tried to kind of put as many kinds of things in as I could, because I thought that what Rob and I did was setting this book up for everyone else to come after us to try and make stories out of it. So I just threw in everything I could think of. So there's all kinds of little hints at difficulties and stories. There's all that stuff about racism. There's all the stuff about the moon. There's stuff about social things. Just lots and lots of stuff that people could use to draw on when they come to make their own stories. So that was the idea of the chapter, just packing it full of things.
And I think and you were drawing on stuff from your own life as well, which was something that happened more and more as we went through the book. It's a natural thing to do as a writer. Is you kind of just dig through the boxes of your own life and find stuff to write about, and it gave the central character Nell a richness that we just didn't expect, because she started to come alive as a kind of collage, and because all of the little bits that were making up her life had genuine feeling or were real memories, and so this strange patchwork started happening, and we had no idea who the lead character of our book that we started writing about was. We didn't even know it was going to be a woman when we started. So and I think Woodrow's was the first instance where you were pulling a few things out of your own life and putting them in, and things that
Well, it was my parents talked about what happened to them when they arrived in Britain in the 50s and what a terrible time they had, and I thought, well, yeah, that's worth talking about, because some of that stuff is still resonating right now.
Yeah. So then we had to do the brave part, which was handing it over to somebody that wasn't just us two.
I think one of the senses you get about the character when you read the book is that she does become a complicated character, and I guess largely because of the fact that she has so many authorial voices being poured into her. But like you said, then after you two kind of set the stage, you had to pass over to the first artist, Ellen Lindner.
But then every writer is a reader first, and that's what this book makes you do as a creator. It's how good you are as a reader is how well you'll be able to write that character, and that's what we were relying on. We just couldn't brief anyone enough for them to be able to carry the story on. It was going to be how they read the stuff that we'd written.
We should make this clear for a second, that the way the book works is essentially the first person, well, in Rob's case, Rob wrote the first chapter, passed his pencils over to Woodrow. Woodrow read the story, and then Woodrow made pencils based on that, and then he passed his pencils on. So what you've kind of got is
we were doing this
cascade
in
of work.
3 or 4 day slots as well. I mean, it was going. I mean, the book was done in 8 months. I mean, we were.
There was no real foreshadowing. There was editorial constraints, like you said, but the first time the person knew about the story was when they received the person before them's work. So it really is kind of like a relay, but like you say, one that has some constraints in place. So it's not complete anarchy.
Well, we had 3 rules. Rule number 1 was you can't kill anybody off arbitrarily unless you've got a really good reason for it. Reason number 2 is if someone's done a story idea already, you can't really do it again. You have to do something else. And I think the third one was just that it has to make sense. You have to be able to say, yes, I understand what this means, I know where it's going, and I can see why you've done it. And if you couldn't do those 3 things, then you just couldn't do your story. I mean, that's pretty lightweight, really, in terms of what you can and can't do. So we spent some time with each person. We would get their script or their thumbnails, and Rob and I would talk about them, and if we thought they were fine, then they would just do them. If we thought they needed some help, then we would talk about what we could do to fix them. So some people needed lots of help because they had an idea they didn't know how to put together. Some people had lots of ideas, but none of them went anywhere. Some people had one idea that they were very protective of, but they couldn't quite make it work. Every permutation you can think of. But we were very concerned with making sure that stories would read very well by themselves, but also read well as a group. So we didn't want to have a situation where you'd have a great 3-parter that went nowhere.
But the challenge was to make it a novel. I mean, when I originally was saying to people, I wanted to be a novel, they kind of looked at me like I was crazy, and there was a lot of scoffing about the whole idea that it would end up somehow reading as a novel, which it does. It does read as a novel, and that's not just down to us editing. It's like I say, it's down to the sensitivity of all of the creators.
Well, it's picking the right people, and then B, it's trusting them to do what they can do.
Yeah.
And not
what you can see if you kind of flick through these now, you see that what we did is, as Nell comes to life, you just go back to Jamie's again. Yeah. So as Nell starts to have her life as opposed to following her parents' life, we picked Jamie Smart, who's kids comics, kids book illustrator, genius. I mean, he's just brilliant at this kind of stuff. But it suited to have that voice giving us the child world. It brought it to life, and following that, the people we picked next were this Gary works for the Beano, so we had a series of and Sarah, who's done a whole series of children's books. So it brought the child life to the fore, having all of these kind of artists who would usually be doing stuff for kids. I mean, obviously they're writing an adult story, but the fact they're drawing it in the style they're familiar with, which is a style that's friendly to kids, made it feel like a childhood. Nell started having a childhood. They're familiar with writing for kids. This is their world. So.
And then as she ages, the style starts to change slightly and become a bit less open and a bit less colourful and just more complicated. Yeah, we were able to challenge people by bringing them in at different ages in her life. So, and one of the other things about it is that the creators we had were. I mean, I don't want to kind of give the impression that we had this kind of collection of these young, eager artists, because we had, as you just flicked there through, I mean, Susie Varty's. She's a pensioner. Yeah, she's 63. And when we briefed Susie Varty and gave her, what year was it, 74, 75, somewhere in the early 70s, she just said, oh, wonderful, I'll go up into my loft. And she brought her diaries down, and her daughter was the same age as Nell at that time. So she flicked through her diaries and saw about the power cuts and how they were sitting around, with and so she was writing from her diaries about her daughter, whereas Luke Pearson, who you just had on there, he wasn't even born when these events were happening. So despite the fact that this isn't a kind of nostalgia thing, we weren't asking people to just write, just about looking back over their own lives. We were asking people to rise to the challenge in different ways.
I mean, if you flip through the book very quickly, you will see that there are elements from British history in it, but when you read it, they're very much background elements, like Luke has the Dalek and Sarah has the space hopper. Those things kind of fade away when you read it, and you just get the sense of the...
Well, they were just there, weren't they?
People like the space hopper, though. That's got a lot of attention.
we should have merchandised it.
We should have merchandised it. Nelson space hopper. Yeah, people really like that.
So as you can see when you go through the book, like you just said, there is a kind of very different visual style to each page, although it is sometimes they tie together, sometimes they don't. And I think to contextualize this within a short story festival is that I think what you really get in terms of each entry, each chapter, is you get to kind of see the story is the artist or the author's vision of the character. So, and that all ties together into the whole that is the book. So what did you two find as kind of the narrative challenges? Because in the beginning of the book, people had more free reign, of course. They could do more with the characters, develop them more, and as it goes on, more and more constraints were placed upon them by...
Well, in a way, not. Well, yes and no, because the constraints kind of stay the same all the way through. You want the characters to be consistent so that you can believe this is the same person, whatever they look like. Because obviously, as you can see from what we're showing you here, the styles of the artists are all, some of them are radically different. So Nell herself, A, she's aging, and B, she's drawn by different people, so she looks different all the time. So we had to make sure that people who are writing her, tried to get her voice the same, so that even if she looked totally different, you could still know who she was. And also, as time went on, there were all the kind of historical things like, okay, Nell went here, she did this, she wouldn't do that, she might do this, she probably wouldn't do that. And we had to talk to people about, what we thought she could do or wouldn't do. And sometimes we just had to say, well, no, it's not very likely that she would do this. It's not likely that she would do that. But we tried not to tell people, what to do. It's only if we just thought it didn't work that we'd say, no, you can't do that.
Yeah, well, I think as you were saying, there's so many different styles here, and we use this as a strength in the book because if you were just looking back over your own life, there are all sorts of different tonal differences in the way you remember parts of your life. There are parts of your life that are more intense. There are parts of your life that are quite surreal. There are parts of your life that are quite grey. And fortunately, the way the artist fell, it gave Nell's life a kind of richness that had it just been one artist trying to do it, that artist would have kind of felt like they had to kind of spin so many plates in order to get that kind of richness and depth. Whereas keep switching from one artist to another and finding what that artist could give us about Nell and her family and her friends, that's kind of what started changing the nature of the book and making it really feel like a novel, that it was giving this, like I say, this real kind of depth to all the characters and to the world and to the life that's been led.
And when you have lots of people doing it, I mean, it goes in directions that you wouldn't have anticipated, because quite a lot of things people come up with, I would have had no idea, what they were doing or why they did that. I mean, we were constantly surprised, weren't we?
Yeah.
When someone was saying, I'm going to make her do this now, I'm going to put her in this, and it's like, really? You're going to do? Oh, okay. Well, yeah. Why not?
It's actually quite true to like Rob said, it's very true to the way that life actually is. I mean, I think most of the people in this room would probably feel quite contradictory about their personalities at most time. One year you can be one way, one day you can be one way, the next day you can be another way. And what's really interesting... at
which point are you the real you?
Exactly.
Exactly. As if there's a kind of definitive point where you go, now I'm me. Oh, damn, that's gone. I've got to move on. What happened? And so that's kind of what we end up giving to readers is, you can find a point and say, yeah, this I really relate to. And lots of people have said, oh, that chapter, that really spoke to me. But whether that's the definitive Nell, well, who'd want that said of any of us?
Well, the thing about comics is we kind of live and breathe on the convention circuit, really, because traditionally in Britain, comics has been quite a small industry. Thankfully now, opening out, we live on the convention circuit, and the great thing about that is it means that we get to we get to have discussions at every convention with fans about the books. And one of the things that I found about this book is that every single reader kind of has a different take on Nell. Some people love her, some people hate her, which is quite an interesting thing. When you consider that...
Who hates her?
Well,
write it down on a bit of paper.
I know, we'll get there. But generally speaking, like Woodrow says, it has this kind of very rich quality to it that most literature doesn't have. I mean, most literature is single author. It's very, very, very structured in terms of narrative. And in this book, there are certainly narrative threads that connect the beginning to the end and influence the characters throughout, but it's very...
I don't know if I'd say it's something that literature doesn't have, but I think it's what any writer strives for, is to achieve that. And sometimes, a writer, whether you're writing in text or you're writing with pictures, you will look for some kind of arbitrary schematic that just contains your idea. That you just some hook, something that's going to enable you, whether it's a rhythm in verse, whether it's just something that gives you a vehicle that you can. And this just turned out to be the perfect vehicle for 54 different creators to find one voice. It's
It's also a thing that happens, as you can see, with style, because one thing you can see straight away is that everyone has their own way of creating the atmosphere of their story. And so as you flick through it, you have all these different looks, and they're all different from each other, and each one gives you a different kind of sensation, a different kind of feeling, and a different kind of appearance, and that really helps to give you this idea of this really complicated thing going on, all these different styles, with all these different kinds of ideas and different approaches. That's what makes it really rich and kind of really exciting. It's like, as you're reading it, you don't really know what you're going to get next. And we didn't know when we were editing it. We sent out the script to one person, they'd send it back. We didn't really know how they were going to do what they were sending back to us. We were just kind of like happy to see what it was.
Yeah.
I think this is maybe a good time to actually talk about what you two think the unique properties of storytelling in comics are, like we discussed a little bit at some other appearances. What do you two see as the key things that set comics apart from other types of art, other types of storytelling?
Well, showing, not telling, for a start. I mean, just the 2 pages we got right here is a good example of that. The 2 styles of these 2 artists are radically different. They're doing the same kind of thing, though. They're telling you about the characters based on what they show you on the surroundings of them, how they're in the frame, how they move in the frame, what their body language is like, and what the colouring is like, what the lettering is like. All these things, which are visual things, give you clues to what you're looking at and give you information about what you're looking at in a way that, if you wanted to try and describe this page, 1993, John McNaught's page, that would take many thousands of words to do what he's done here in this page. There are so many kind of complicated transitions and stylistic things and movements and ideas and patterns and things, rhythms, all that stuff that gives you the world that he's talking about. You couldn't do that in a novel in the same way at all, because A, it would take you lots and lots of words, and B, you still couldn't actually show people what you're talking about. Obviously, you can create a picture in everyone's minds. Everyone creates their own picture based on the words they're reading. But with a comic, you're showing them this picture. Again, you can interpret it the way that you want to interpret it, which is kind of this one thing. But the fact that you can make something and you can show that thing to everybody is something that you can't really do any other way.
It's like you can imagine but like you say, because you can show a lot more, you don't have to spend as much time extraneously describing things, which sometimes can give literature prose a kind of artifice, like imagine a Thomas Hardy book, but without all the time he spends on actually describing surroundings, because he's a very kind of descriptive writer. But here, I mean, John McNaught is probably the perfect example of this, because John's all about creating a sense of space, an emotional kind of tone. And you can see in all of John's work, really, not just his work in Nelson, you can see that he does a lot with very precious little dialogue. And this is actually quite a unique chapter of the book, isn't it? Because it's one of the few that doesn't directly feature Nell preceding Rob's.
You feel her presence all through it because of the photographs of her. But yeah,
well, it's
about her dad.
Yeah.
Well, should we give the background to it? To
kind
of explain
absolutely.
what I mean. The choice of John to go in here was a perfect fit because later in the book, Nell's father splits from her mother. He becomes homeless. We don't know where he is. We just kind of know he's gone missing. And so, if you flick back one, you can see Nell going to
the other way, I think.
Nell going to look for her father and unable to find him. There's a big kind of emotional, tearful moment with her friend there, and then we suddenly switch to John's chapter, and we find we find her father, but we kind of glimpse him. It's almost like we're just, we're almost looking around a corner and seeing the kind of shadow of him, because he is kind of absent now. He's kind of left her life, and so these little clues that we get to
at arm's length, really, aren't they?
Yeah, and also that kind of also reflects the way his life's gone. He's kind of slightly absent from his own life. He's completely lost the centre of who he is. And he's just sort of living in this caravan in the middle of nowhere, and the only people he talks to are the kids that do the graffiti under the bridge. John's perfect for that. But then that's like I say, when we were looking at earlier in the book, and we were looking at now bounding around on space hoppers and things, those voices perfectly captured that kind of spring-loaded sense of childhood.
You find in the next few pages it suddenly gets, you have this kind of quiet. I think for a lot of people, this area of the book is the book that has the kind of most resonance, I guess, because I guess there's a kind of common unity amongst teenagers, young adults, and a lot of the experience in this area of the book, I think, are kind of.
But it's this surprise thing. If you go back again, talk about being surprised, is that one artist came in with something. If you go to Adam's just before. Yeah, so Adam Cadwell came up with something that's very, very kind of early 20s lifestyle, going to a gig, meeting the right guy, all this sort of thing, and he kind of set it up for a romance, and and then he handed it over to Faz, who did something really beautifully romantic, which is actually about a couple who haven't been together very long, but their intimacy's kind of destroyed by the fact that they
both got food poisoning.
They both got food poisoning,
and they spend the whole
so they spend an evening sharing a bathroom, which but it has a kind of intimacy to it we just wouldn't have expected that. If you'd said somebody, well, now we need the sense that these two people have bonded in a relationship. Well, Faz came from total left field, and in a way that kind of is two people that are finally bonded in a relationship that they can.
I think when the book began getting reviewed in places like the Guardian, etc., this was actually one of the chapters that was zeroed in on. And I think because, like you said, it's an event that we've all had.
Let's not dwell on it, Mark.
I know, but the beautiful thing about it is it's self-contained because it's about a single event. Yeah. But also, it says a little something about now. Mm-hmm. So who follows on?
Jake follows on.
Jake,
and again, very, very different kind of feel, very different setting, much more kind of dramatic and much more of the kind of funny, wild, vivid thing that you might think this was going to be like.
Mm. Yeah, the high times of your 20s. Yeah, I'm on top of the world. I'm a star.
But this is great actually, because this chapter starts off really exciting and really buzzy, and then ends like really kind of grim.
Oh yeah, it does. Yeah.
But that's it. I mean, you find that there are a couple of people that have these really intense chapters. I think James Harvey is another one. How did you kind of feel about? I mean, one of the things that I guess you two could never really control was the difference in intensity between chapters, because although you had a lot of guidance for people, I think basically the person's style always lends itself to the level of intensity. So how do you think that the interplay between chapters breaks down?
Well, there's an element of luck, I guess, involved, because you pick
some of it was by design, wasn't it?
Yeah, you pick people and put them in a certain position and then see what they do. Yeah. And some work out better than others do.
Yeah, I mean, where we did, I mean, the bit that I was thinking of as being by design was where we had Duncan Fagredo doing where Nell has a breakdown. I mean, earlier in her life she's sort of taking drugs, and then we kind of see her having a breakdown here, and it's in, beautiful kind of realistic style. And then she starts taking Prozac, and we switch to this style, and this is kind of her on Prozac, and it's cardboard cutout world, which it's kind of strangely reflective of life on Prozac.
But it also beautifully illustrates the way different cartooning styles, different comic styles
lend themselves to certain things.
Exactly,
exactly. So when you look back at the book and you see the kind of way that it was constructed, do you feel that there's a specific section of the book that's kind of the strongest, or as proud parents, can you not? Do you love each chapter?
All of our children.
Yeah. Is there a sequence?
That's kind of truer than you might think, because I had to, when I was editing it, over this long period of time, it was kind of our jobs to keep track of everything. So to know who all the characters were, know where they were up to in their lives, know what they were doing, know who was related to who or who's going out with who or all that. And I had to keep this kind of little kind of flow chart going of where everybody was. So by the time we were at this point, which is, I don't know, when Nell's about, 35, there was all this stuff that I had to remember about them. And it was like these were real people. You know, I had this real stuff going on, and it was kind of almost a bit nutty.
Yeah, if somebody suggested something that didn't fit, we were always kind of quite hurt, weren't we? Yeah, it's like, she wouldn't do that.
It's interesting. Woodrow says remember, but in honesty, there was a huge dossier of information that was created around the characters.
Yeah.
And I guess it was seen more or less as the Bible in the end of it.
Well, the real Bible was the book, because each creator. I mean, this is what was tough on the people that came later in the book, was that, if somebody that's in these years that you're flicking through now, they would have to read 100 pages before they could actually think about their story. So it was quite a test for them.
Yeah, it's like doing your homework. You have to read the whole thing, and then you can do your bit.
Of course. You had the same challenge, though, because you wrote the final chapter as well as the first chapter. So you had to face the same kind
I'd kind of read it all, though. I was pretty familiar with it.
But then it all changed, because when we first set it up, we knew that Rob and I were going to start it and Rob and I were going to finish it. We had no idea what was going to happen in between times. But I don't know if you did, I had an idea about what I was going to do in my chapter, even before this whole thing got rolling. But obviously, as it went along, I kept thinking, I can't do that now. Maybe I'll do this. And then a bit further, I can't do that either. Maybe I'll do this. And by the time it got to that penultimate chapter, the thing I wanted to do was completely something else. And it was just based on what had happened in the chapters before. And so you couldn't really plan anything, because you didn't really know where it was going. Which we like that, we didn't.
I think that was true
of
a lot of the creators. A lot of them said that they'd picked a year, and they were like, 1984. I remember 1984. I can't wait. And then when they actually got the book and they read up to 1984, what they thought they were going to do just went straight out the window, because they were following the story. They couldn't kind of shoehorn in this part of their life that they wanted to. Some other part of their life came up, and there was one, Dan McDade. I gave him a year, and he writes Doctor Who stuff, and I've got a lot of respect for him as a writer, but he's never written anything like this. And I gave him the year, and he's kind of and I was like, well, what's the matter, And he said, that's the year my dad died, and I was, okay, And he said, do I have to do that year? And I was like, well, you're kind of in to do that year now, everyone. And so he went away, and he wrote this just incredibly moving thing, because he just thought, right, okay, I know what I'm going to do then.
So he killed Nell's dad.
So he just and we were, like when Woodrow was saying earlier, we didn't want people arbitrarily just killing characters. But when he came to us with his story, it was so raw. We were just, I believed it. I believed that that's what happened, and so yeah.
And after carrying Nell's dad with me all that time in my head, thinking about it, I was really upset. Actually.
Yeah, exactly. I created him on the first page. Yeah. I'm just saying, letting somebody else kill your character, but I totally believed it had happened.
So that's interesting. There were other like romance was not to be treaded on by many people, but eventually it seeps into the book, as it does in real life. Why do you think that it's so important to hold back these kind of huge moments?
It's not about holding them back. It's about making them feel like they're real and not just tacked on or just put in there, to have an effect. I think because we were very careful about saying people don't just do something for the effect of it. It has to make sense. It has to feel like you mean it. It has to feel like it fits the character. It meant that things developed gradually, and you got to a point where you felt like, okay, well, this point here is really where something should happen. So when it does happen, it feels like, yeah, it deserves to be there. It really means something.
I think Dan's is kind of the... when I read Dan's, and I felt this from probably the very first time that I read it, for me it kind of encapsulates the whole kind of book. It's a big turning point in the narrative. Nell's father is quite a huge background influence throughout the whole book, and this is kind of the most... This is kind of, I guess, the kind of climax.
Well, if you go back, he just sent us this scribble of that first page where there's just this, and it looks a bit like a fantasy moment, which is the kind of stuff he does, but it's just this great big black hole in the sky, and he just sent us this, and we were just like,
actually, I made him make it more extreme as well, because he was took to heart what we said about doing something realistic. So he talked about this giant, moon sun thing sucking out all the life on Earth. but he made it just a little thing. And I was saying, well, actually, no, this is the time to actually really go for it. So you've got this enormous hole, and it really feels like it should feel.
It does feel like, some horrible black moment is just hanging over everyone,
That's, I mean, that's again, going back to, that's kind of something comics can do. I mean, you can have...
I mean, I guess magic realism sort of does it in literature, doesn't it? You know, the kind of throw, where you kind of throw some, sort of angel in a cage or something in that, reflects on it. It's, but with comics, it is right there in your face, and it's at times comics make take literature a little bit closer to music, and it's got that immediacy to it.
I mean, not many creators can get away with kind of this apocalyptic vision of the Spice Girls in the corner of the page, but he does it, and he has the big black hole, and it's really great that he shows exactly how this kind of iconography can be incorporated and used to enhance.
Well, the Spice Girls is the Horsemen of the Apocalypse.
Exactly, precisely. It's quite something. I guess you said that you don't want to. You're hesitant to pick favourites. But one question that neither of you have ever answered on the kind of Nelson trail is picking kind of what are your picks from the whole book. There must be somebody in the book that you really read it and you thought, this is incredible. This is why we created this project.
It was probably Jamie Smart one for me, just because it was at the beginning of the book, and that's when I believed it was going to work. And also, if you go back to the Jamie Smart, he did something that we weren't really expecting, which is right at the very end of his.
It's fast to get through.
Right at the end of his chapter, he did this great thing where it's kind of Nell's imagination. We kind of see Nell's imagination. She sees the rent collector coming around as this big monster. She when her parents are arguing, she sees her dad as a kind of superhero character and her mum as a witch who keeps keeps bothering him. And then you kind of follow in that logic. Yeah, that's a kid's world. And then he had her talking to the switched-off television at the end, and she's actually imagining that she's talking to her twin brother that died, a few weeks old, and that's sowed a seed then that just went through the whole book, and it's not something that I predicted at all. I didn't think that. I just couldn't see it, and it became a theme that the book wouldn't. And like I say, it's on the cover. It's kind of become the theme of the whole book. This kind of sense of having a part of yourself missing and looking for that missing part of yourself. And I had no idea what he was going to do. I mean, Jamie did it in. I think he drew that in a couple of days.
He was one of the fastest people, right?
Yeah, well, he really does do it for a living. He knocks this stuff out at an incredible rate.
I think it's about 4 days, wasn't it, from start to finish?
Yeah, but it was just.
And like you said, the thing about Jamie is he kind of inhabits this space already. I mean, if you follow Jamie on Twitter, he's quite a hyperactive kind of childlike, which is interesting because
he's responsible for so many sort of kids' book titles, but also adult comics and all sorts of books, so many different kinds, But yeah, he was the perfect pick to just give the thing a lift off,
And Woodrow, the same question to you, I'm afraid.
Oh, I can't pick a favourite because
he's going to pick his own.
There are so many points when you think, oh, this was just what this needed at this point. This one is perfect. This one is perfect. I keep going through it and I think, oh, this one's my favourite. No, it's not. Oh, this one is. So I didn't
say that was my favourite, did I?
No.
Okay.
No. He just said it was the best.
I'll be in major trouble when we get back. Otherwise,
he just said it was maybe the one that you kind of felt.
Actually,
was the
okay.
biggest,
Well, going back to early on. Something that I kept coming back to over and over and over again is this thing. Sean Longcroft did this little bit here at the bottom of the second page. It's just 3 panels, and it's Nell's sister. Nell's parents go to the pub, and they leave the kids in the car, like you did in the 70s.
Yeah, it's very much health and safety gone wrong in the 1970s.
And they go wandering around, and Nell's sister wanders onto the railway track, plays around for a while. And as she gets off the railway track, a train comes thundering past. And if she'd got off the track like a second later, she'd be dead. And it's amazing. It's just in those 3 panels, there's a whole story there. And when I read it for the first time, my mouth just kind of dropped open. It's like, oh my God, that's amazing. That's incredible.
It has almost a Tintin sort of feel to it as well. That little scene, yeah.
Because it's so kind of casual. It's like you don't really say anything about it, and they forget about it. It's not mentioned again. It's just something that happened, and she doesn't even know that she was that close.
But I think, I mean, I don't know if Sean's here yet. I mean, he is coming over this evening, but I think, because I know him very well, that comes out of him. He's the same age as me. Living through that time in the 70s when it was completely carefree and there was no health and safety, and the fact he's now got young children, and that kind of sense of you just wouldn't let your kids kind of go roaming off and not worry about them anymore, and that is, it's a kind of fragility to it that we project onto kids now. So, and
on the next page, when their dad says, "Oh, what did your kids do?" and she says, "I played on the railway." He's like, "What railway?" He doesn't know his kid nearly got killed or anything. It's like, he doesn't know. He just had a couple of pints.
Yeah. Well, he's just had a few pints before he drives on the car again.
So I do love that. I do, and I come back to that a lot.
And again, something that we've never spoken about throughout all of this is the...
You're worrying me.
Well, no, this is a good one. We've never really spoken on stage about the reception that the book got, because in terms of the comics community, this was actually a pretty... This was, I think, for at least half a year, this was kind of the driving force of kind of the community on Twitter, their interest, the people working in it, as well as the people outside of it. And then when we released it, it was thankfully one of the comic books that crossed over into mainstream book reviewing, and in the UK that's fairly rare that it happens.
Yeah. Well, and we're doing things like this, I mean, let's be honest. If the comic we'd done was a superhero comic, you wouldn't really want to sit and listen to us talking about it. So, but then that's the whole point that we started with. Is it's a storytelling medium. It's got nothing to do with whatever anyone's preconceptions may be about comics. It's just a way of telling stories, and that's what this book set out to showcase.
When one thing I guess that we are very proud about is that it actually works, because even the artists who are working on it were thinking this is never going to work. It's not going to happen. It's a great idea.
Well, I had to put a disclaimer in the original when I set the brief out to everyone. I put a disclaimer on the bottom saying that even if it doesn't work, at least we'll have this great anthology, with a kind of loose connecting theme. Because everyone was just, we're not going to make a novel.
Did you say the same thing to Kenny? Kenny's our publisher, by the way.
Kenny didn't believe it was going to work. No, he didn't. No. There was only two of us that actually believed it was going to work.
We kept saying to everyone, it's going to work, and everyone was saying, "Oh, it's not going to work," And they were queuing up to kind of say, "Oh, well done, but forget it, you failed there." So the amount of people who actually came to us humbly and said, "I couldn't believe you were going to pull it off, but you really did pull it off." That was actually quite good. We enjoyed that little bit of I told you it's going to happen.
Well, and aside from that, it means that the book can just have a life of its own. It doesn't need us going around doing this all the time and telling everybody what a great thing and why it works. And you can just pick it up and read it. It doesn't need us explaining about the nature of comics and storytelling. It's just a book. You start the first page like you would any book and read it to the end. That's what it does. It's any book should be able to read itself.
And you will, as I was saying, at the time it was quite rare to actually get a kind of domestically produced comic. What's the irony? It's quite rare to get a domestically produced literary comic covered by the mainstream kind of literary reviewers. But since then, it's kind of opened the door for a few people, especially Self-Made and Nobrow have begun to get mainstream. That's Self-Made Hero and Nobrow, another two kind of small publishers at the kind of forefront.
Yeah, British publishers who are publishing comics without aiming for the comics bookshop market that just sells superheroes and stuff.
Well, that's one of the ironies of the business for us, is that most of our work is for overseas publishers. We're working people in the States, in France, in Japan in some cases, because there wasn't a homegrown comics market and there weren't homegrown comics makers. And so doing something that's all about Britain, it's explicitly about growing up in Britain in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, living in Britain, what it's like to be here. It's something that couldn't have happened anywhere else. So I'm really proud that we did something that's totally rooted in this place and is about this place. And it gives us something to say, okay, well, this is what it's like to be in Britain. This is what it's like to live here. This is what it's like to be a person living here. And I think we've done something that you couldn't have done any other way. And it's a good kind of place to start from, to build more voices that are talking about things that are related to our lives here now, and that aren't some American thing or some French thing or some other countries' idea of what it's like to be here. You know, this from the inside out.
It's very interesting because I was speaking to he's on the page, John McNaught recently, and his work is kind of very British too. It's all about kind of suburban life or city life in the UK, and I think the tendency has been, because basically as an audience we've relied on material from the US and Canada and France, bigger comics markets, for so long that there's a real kind of hesitancy for people to kind of describe their own lives. You know, when you think of Chris Ware or Dan Clowes, wonderful comics, you know, very immaculately constructed, beautiful narratives.
You wouldn't bat an eye if they were writing about Boston or Chicago or somewhere.
Exactly.
That's what you'd expect them to write about. Whereas, somebody in comics writing about Bristol.
And it's actually really startling when you look, especially, I mean, if you go to Rob's final page, where it's very, it's kind of startling in a way to look at a graphic novel and be like, oh, this looks like where I live.
Yeah.
Because the kind of top flight work in comics has always been kind of by the alternative scene in North America, or by the massive French scene. So I don't know. It just feels like maybe this is the turn, and you see it, and you've seen it as well in Glyn Dillon, who.
Well, it's just that thing of romanticising, you know, the area that you know of. We're used to kind of feeling a certain kind of excitement from the glamour of New York and the amazement of, you know, Las Vegas and the coolness of Los Angeles and all these places that we've seen thousands of times in films and things, and they have this kind of glamour to them. And it's like, well, we can do that here too. You know, we can talk about where we live, you know, in the same way.
Yeah, well, that's a bit like the kind of kitchen sink movies of the 60s, isn't it? You know, over here, you know.
So, like you say, it's kind of, there's a tradition in British literature of doing this, of creating these narratives from kind of very domesticated settings. I mean, that's the thing, we're so used to kind of the old world that we never see the glamour in it, we never see the beauty in it, we never see, I guess sometimes we forget about the kind of narrative of our own lives.
Well, I think sometimes there's a kind of an easy hit, kind of Coca-Cola kind of storytelling, which is the, you know, what's the revenge angle, you know, that you encounter in all sorts of cinema and literature, and I think looking for that easy hit and that quick reward is not necessarily what anyone wants to write.
And as we all know,
you kind of end up doing that as a job. I mean, I've done it as a job. You know, it's not necessarily the story you really want to write, and you have to. It takes. It does take a kind of a real faith in yourself and in your own kind of mission as a writer to stick with it and tell your own story, rather than think, you know, I can do something that's going to make me a few quid, you know, and write a Doctor Who story or whatever it is, you know, with you know, oh, here's the revenge angle, you know.
And also it's something that comes out of character rather than out of plot. I mean, one thing about this book that I hope you'll find, you know, when you read it, I'm saying when, not if, is that because it is really about characters and not about plot as such, everything that happens in it feels like it's an organic outgrowth of what these people are like, who they are, what they do. So when something big does happen, you feel it because, you know, you care about these people. And it's not just a plot device, it's not just, you know, a car crash or a plane thing or a hold-up or something. It's something real that real people feel and real people care about. And I think if it takes a long time for that to happen, that's even better, because when it gets to that point, you really get it.
And on the point of getting it, I think we have to open the floor up now to a Q&A.
Mm-hmm.
If
we've got some roving microphones, or at least one roving microphone, so we can put the house lights up, is somewhere at the back. If you put your hand up to ask a question, either about Nelson or about the broader comic world, I know our panel will be very happy to answer anything. Have you got a question over here? While the microphone's getting there, can I just ask you about the relationship between shelter and the book?
Oh, of
Would
course.
one of you like to say something about that?
Absolutely. The whole idea when Woods and Rob created the book was to kind of unify the kind of comics community, and I guess we thought, seeing as from a publisher's standpoint, I guess we really thought, because we were kind of doing something to bring everybody together, it was an exercise in showing off comics. We thought that the community was benefiting from it, and we thought at the same time that why not have a charity benefit at the same time? It was going to be a book that was loads of people were involved in, and we kind of figured that we should
Share.
We should exactly. We should share something. Everybody was being involved. Everybody on this book was so passionate about it. They donated all of their time and labour for free.
As we were asking creators, they were saying, "Are we doing it for charity? What are we doing it for?" Because they might have thought, "Yeah, this is a great idea," but they've still got to give up their time for nothing because no one got paid. None of us got a penny for doing this book. So we did it because we love doing these stories and we wanted to make this book. So the money when it came in had to go somewhere.
And we
creators put forward their suggestions for who the charity should be. Eventually, after a few meetings, we settled on Shelter.
And
after finishing the book, I had to actually go to Shelter to try and help. I did.
That's the glamorous life of comics. But yeah, it was very important to us that we kind of used the power of the book to benefit a cause, and it just felt right for everybody that it should go to Shelter, who were very, very great to us throughout the whole book. And it was really great when we finally finished the book and released it, and Shelter came down to our launch party, and we had a really great time.
And they have got a check.
Yes.
So when you buy a copy at the end, you're doing something incredibly altruistic as well as getting a fantastic book. We've got a question here. Do you want to just?
Yes, I have a remark and a question. The remark was just to say I've only just purchased a copy of the book, but was able to dip in, scan it before I came. And one thing that really struck me was how all-embracing it seems to be. I mean, these different styles, they just really gave me a sense that this could be anyone, this person. And I thought that was quite magical about it. And the question I had to ask was, in conception and in the process of putting the book together, did you have any sense or notion of target audience at all?
I guess
target readership.
We did that thing that I guess you do a lot, where we thought, well, we're kind of making the book that we want to see. We think this book needs to exist, so we're just going to make it. And I think that if you kind of write well enough and you think carefully enough about how you structure something, then anyone should be able to get something out of it. Because one of the problems, I think, with our medium at this point is that it's still very, very focused on directing things at specific markets, as it were. And I think if you just make something good and leave it open enough that anyone can pick it up and read it, then that's the best kind of book you want to have, because it doesn't require any kind of prior knowledge. You don't need to know anything about, how many trolls live in this cave or what their powers are, or you can just read it. So we just thought, let's just make a really good book that anyone can read.
I think that it's worth stating that in our kind of area of comics as a medium, I think that's how we can agree to say it. Almost no artists have that kind of thought in mind. They don't think, who's my target audience? They think, what kind of story do I want to tell? Which is the beautiful thing about it, is that we have a lot of very, very passionate creators who want to tell their own stories.
Yeah, I think perhaps even more so with Nelson. I mean, I think we were quite lucky with Kenny, who's the publisher. He didn't ask anything of us. I mean, I've spoken to a couple of other publishers, and I had to ask them, had I come to you with Nelson, what would you have said? And those kind of questions were what they were asking. Then they admitted that, now it's come out and it's a success, it's easy for them to say, oh yeah, we would have done that. But in all honesty, at the time when it was an idea, they would have wanted to know who we're selling this thing to.
I mean, if you look at a lot of Kenny Penman is the proprietor of Blank Slate Books, and if you look at his entire list, the list is filled with just stories, and like you say, he just finds artists he likes, asks them if they've got a story to tell, and they tell him the story they want to tell, and basically they publish it. It's that simple. It's a very creator-driven imprint.
Have you got another question out there?
Right at the back.
Yes, there's one there.
I have read Nelson and I absolutely loved it. I just think it's phenomenal. And I've read quite a few of the sort of French novels, and the one from the Ivory Coast as well. Is it Margaret Aboué? That's it, the Aya ones, do you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I really am passionate about this. But I'm a teacher and I work with children. And for many of the children, a story like Artemis Fowl in the graphic novel form is really powerful. How do you feel about telling other people's stories?
Well, interestingly, Rob, was it 2 years ago? Rob's actually adapted Don Quixote for Self-Made Hero.
Yeah.
He's currently working on the
puzzled
second
there.
volume. They published it in 2 volumes. So, I guess well, you've worked with other people's characters too.
Indeed,
so
I've done all
I'll,
kinds
I'll
of-
let you. I'll pass it over to you two. Really.
Sorry, what was the actual question? I mean, I've
How
done
do
all sorts of stuff from. Yeah, well,
Yeah. If you were to do a Neil Gaiman like Coraline or
you mean
Artemis
working
Fowl
as
or
an
something.
illustrator rather than
Yes,
working
but
as a
no,
writer?
to make it into a graphic novel.
Right, okay.
With Rob as both the writer and the artist. He's just taking the source material. Is
Right.
that correct? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I suppose in a way, Don Quixote is like that. I mean, obviously the source material is a bit older, but yeah, no, it can work, but I think you have to be careful on the projects that you choose that you don't just become another part of the merchandise machine, which unfortunately, I mean, I don't want to knock anyone else's work, but it does happen quite a lot that because I've got kids and I'll get them stuff. And when I'll actually look at the content, it's been knocked together as a merchandise item. They're going to buy the Ben 10 thing because they love Ben 10. It doesn't really matter whether it's a quality comic book, So, yeah, with that kind of caveat, yeah, I mean, I would do it.
Well, it's just that thing of when you're making things, you want to make the best thing you can make. So, if you're working on something that belongs to someone else, your challenge is just to make it as good as you can make it. And you're good at what you do, you're good at writing, good at drawing. So you just want to make something that's well crafted, that has a good arc to it, that feels right. And working with other people's characters is one of those things that you just do because that's your job, is to make things come to life. I haven't got a passion about it in any particular kind of way. I like my job of making things, so I enjoy doing that. But I enjoy making my own things more because it's just making something that's I believe in personally that means something to me, whereas merchandising stuff doesn't really mean anything to me. I'm just proud of it as a job, So yeah.
Well, it's worth saying that when you look at, I know Rob's going to be hesitant to pat himself on the back, but when you read the first volume of Don Quixote, you do see Rob's very kind of, I want to say, auteur vision in it. When you see it, you see Rob Davis, the cartooner. It's the cartoonist. It's not like you've just.
It's back to what I was saying about writers being readers. It's my reading of the book. That's what my version of Don Quixote is. It's that's how I read the book. It's a little bit different if some of the kind of things that you're talking about, maybe what I think you're referring to.
Well, you mentioned Artemis Fowl, and you've worked on Doctor Who, correct?
Yeah, well, I've done Doctor Who stuff, yeah, and some of that, sometimes there's the opportunity to do Doctor Who work that gives you the freedom to write the stories that you want, and that maybe reflect the good stories that they write for the TV shows. There are other opportunities for other magazines that I've worked for where I've got to go really careful here, actually. where, like I say, it is kind of merchandise fodder. I wouldn't buy it for my kids. So.
Which is there again.
Which is probably got a chance for one more question. In fact, there's a question at the back, and then there's a question at the front, and they'll probably have to be the last two questions.
One of you commented about, because of the varying styles of the artists, you needed to keep the voice consistent so that the characters could be recognised across the varying graphic styles. How did you manage the process of getting the textual side of it to work?
That's a great question.
Well, it's literally that thing of saying this kind of dialogue works for this kind of character. This kind of dialogue doesn't work for that character. This character wouldn't say that. Can you think of a different way to put that? And just literally on that level, just saying, try it again. Try it like this. Try it like that. Try it like this. Just subtle things, just to move things around, because we've got those voices in our heads in a way that people who just come on wouldn't have them. So we were able to say, just tweak it a bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's about your ear, but again, some people you could just offer them a couple of suggestions and they would take it in a positive way. Depending on each different creator reacted very differently to criticism. We're dealing with a lot of different people and a lot of different egos. So, some people you had to tread very carefully, and other people were happy to have their work ripped apart and put back together, and discuss it. So,
yeah,
it changed from one to the next. It really did.
I think I guess because a lot of people on the book had never had editorial input.
Well, exactly. There were some people that worked for independent publishers, and they've never had an editor, so they didn't even know what the experience was of sending something in and somebody sending it back again. Well, no, I've already sent it to you. What are you doing? So.
But I mean, I should. The caveat to that is that, of course, I mean, the process was not very didactic from you two at all.
Well, no.
They're basically there as to kind of guide the project.
Well, no, we're fans of all the people that we asked on the book, so we love them all.
No one was ever harmed in the. No one was harmed in the production of this book.
And then final question from Dan.
From us.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. Well, I was just wondering, was there ever a time that you needed to sit all the artists down and discuss who did what? Because
All at the same time.
Like a board meeting.
yeah, kind of like a board meeting. Because
Just a virtual one, really.
no plot holes or anything just managed to occur. It was
Well, that's
just
the. I guess
entirely
that's
smooth
the.
sailing.
That's the benefit of working on the internet now. I mean, the book was born on the internet and it was gestated on the internet.
There was never any simultaneous kind of meeting, was there?
No.
I don't think.
That only happens at the party afterwards.
Yeah, well, it's too late then. The book was out. Wasn't it?
No, it was all done via email and telephone. We would get a script or an outline from somebody by email. Rob and I would ring each other up and talk about it. Then we'd either ring the person up and talk about it, or we'd email them if it wasn't very complicated. And that was kind of as close as it got. I mean, we didn't meet anyone physically, apart from, I think Paul Grist doesn't have a computer that works, so he posted his artwork to me. So that was the only physical piece of artwork I got for the whole thing, was one page from one person. And the rest of it was all done virtually, all done by email, on the phone.
As a kind of final note, I should say that because we've spoken a lot about the internet, we've spoken a lot about Twitter, there really is a really huge, thriving community of artists going at Twitter at the moment. So I would suggest that you follow Rob on Twitter as @RobGod.
I've actually got a little...
Well, you can see it on here. And,
the original conversation we had on Twitter, Woodrow and I, it actually features at the back of the book.
Yeah, there it is.
yeah, I
I
suppose
thought I'd put that in.
You probably can't read it from here, but you can see it in the book
Is this your
itself.
DMs?
Yeah, these are the messages that we sent each other about this book. And it's just Rob
It
saying,
really
"I've
is
got
just
this great
Woodrow
idea."
saying, what's this idea you're on about then, and
So,
me trying to outline it in 140 characters.
so if you grab a copy of the book, go in the back, you'll see their Twitter handles and follow them, and no doubt you'll kind of enter this kind of really exciting world of new and existing talent. Thoroughly recommend it.
Fantastic, and that's a great moment to end. I just want to thank Rob, Woodrow and Martin for taking us on a really wonderful journey through a completely different approach to storytelling. I think it's been fascinating for all of us to see the genesis of this great book, which, aside from being a really engrossing read, I think it's a great celebration of the comic art. I mean, you've got 44, is it?
Yeah.
44 of the really great...
50, I think.
50
Yeah,
even.
54.
Yeah. I think it's been an event during which we've learnt a lot. We've learnt about the romance of food poisoning. Some of us have been reminded about the carefree 70s without health and safety, and what a wonderful time it was. You can see what a child with 50 parents would turn out like. I did want to ask I wanted to ask whether you were proud of her, how she lived her life, but perhaps you can tell us all that later. It is a fantastic book, which you must go and look at if you haven't seen it already. It's in a wonderful cause as well in terms of supporting shelter, so I do hope you'll buy it. Please join me in thanking all of our panel again. If you could just, when you start applauding, we're going to kind of make our way through the auditorium to the back. You have a chance to buy the book. They will sign it for you. They'll probably even do a little drawing for you. Well, no, that's probably... but please, join the panel. Join me in thanking the panel again for a really wonderful event. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.